talking a little bit about my collection, I have this Amiga 500, which needs some serious cleaning up and maybe some retro brighting because it's got that typical sort of yellow tinge because of the impact of ultraviolet light on the plastics. I had bought a bunch of Amiga motherboards and computers that were somewhat broken from a local person here in Toronto that ran sort of a video studio. And one of those computers, it sort of worked, and to get it working, you kind of had to push down on the keyboard. I actually sold that about a year ago to someone because I bought this Amiga 1200 from the UK and brought it over here, and it actually has a USB drive, so it's connected up to the IDE drive, and it's actually, I know it's got memory, a CF card. Maybe it's an SD card. I think it's a CF card actually in there that's already pre-loaded with Workbench and stuff like that. The 1200 I have always lusted after having, mainly because of the advanced graphics architecture chipset. So over 252,000 colors, 206,000 colors. I need to double check on that. I'm doing a lot of this from memory, but this was an amazing computer, and I had friends of mine who had 1200s in the UK, and I just lusted after them. So 68020 based, similar sound architecture. In fact, I think it was the exact same sound architecture as in the old and enhanced chipset, but the graphics were just so much better on these. And talking about the 1200, I'd be remiss in talking about the CD32. I actually have two of these. One, which the CD-ROM drive actually works, that's this one, and I've got another that actually has a Terrible Fire accelerator card in it that also lets me connect an external floppy drive, and I can use that as a full-fledged Amiga 1200 as well. So I have a whole video dedicated to the life of the CD32 that's coming out soon. This is probably my most favorite game console. It was actually the first game console that I actually purchased. The funny thing is, I often will talk about the Dreamcast, the Sega Dreamcast, as being my first game console, because it was the first game console that I actually used as a game console. However, this had a little bit of a split personality in that you could use it as a game console, but when I first bought it, I actually used it as an external CD-ROM drive using either Cernet or Parnet. I think it was Cernet, attached to my Amiga 3000 when I was living in the UK. I talk about that in the dedicated CD32 video. And as I've already kind of implied in this series, I also have a number of emulations of the Amiga. So I've got Amiga running on my Raspberry Pi 400 here, which is showing the Wikipedia page on the Amiga, and also an article about music and the Amiga from The Guardian, although it might be a little washed out. I've kind of realized the video's a little bit washed out. And then I've got Amiga Quanto's Amiga Forever running on my big PC that's running Arkanoid right now, and on my Steam Deck I've got Hybris playing on Emulation Station, which I use for both on the Steam Deck and also on my big retro arcade panel, which I know I've talked about a few times and referred to. I will do a video soon on that. In fact, that'll be the next video I do after this Amiga series. I also have this Linux-based system on a chip, the A500. This is the mini version. They have a full-size version that's going to come out soon, which I think is epic. It's from the same people that make the C64 Mini and create the full-size the C64. And it comes with a tank mouse, which is pretty epic, and it still has those beautiful click sounds. And interestingly, this came with a gamepad controller that's very similar to the CD32 one. So the one that Commodore made with that, for the CD32. I haven't actually spent a lot of time playing with this. I probably should. I have actually taken a bunch of Amiga software and actually put it on an SD card and hooked it in to this particular computer to play around with it. So pretty epic. The design of this sort of mini system on a chip computer is pretty epic. I mean, the detail that, even down to putting in a fake floppy drive. Yeah, they could have put an SD card reader in there. Yeah, but hey, you can read them off the USB. No trapdoor expansion, but it doesn't need it because this will play both 1200 and original chipset and ECS chipset games. So OCS, ECS, and AGA. Gotta love the acronyms, right? Original chipset, enhanced chipset, and advanced graphics architecture. So I've talked throughout, a bunch of model numbers of the Amiga. You had the 1000, which is this guy here. I've already shown you A500, which came out in 1987. And then you have the 2000, which was sort of the much bigger version. You could put cards in it and really expand it. And it's that model that was often used as the video toaster. You have the 3000 that came out in 1990. Again, 68030 base, so really kicked up from the 68,000 versions, which were the 1500 and the 2000, to a 68030 microprocessor that was in there, which also had a number of card slots, so you could actually put cards in where needed. And then the last sort of versions were the 600, which was really a even further cost-reduced version of the 500 with the ECS chipset. You then had the 1200, which I've just shown you. And then there was the 4000, which was really the final version of the Amiga, and really kind of start looking like a PC. And you could really see that's the mismanagement of the Amiga line really in that particular product. There were two other versions of the 3000 and 4000. The 3000T, which was a tower version of the 3000, and then there's the 4000T, which again also was a towered version of the 4000. The 4000 was based on the 68040 from Motorola, although I do believe there was an 030 version available. And then you have the 1200, which was 68020 based. There was also the CD-TV, which was really an Amiga 500 stuck in sort of a hi-fi box, which people really didn't know what to do with. And also the price point was really expensive. I could see that I wanted one because I always had this dream of having a pretty spiffy sound system, component system with an amp and CD player, etc. And I could totally see having a computer as part of that on my TV that could play amazing sound through a really beautiful stereo system. So really ahead of the curve, almost too ahead of its time, really. And without the price point, but kind of a cool educational computer as well as game console. But again, it had this sort of split personality of, am I a computer? Am I a hi-fi device? What am I? But still nonetheless a cool system. I've actually owned two of them in my lifetime. Again, I kind of sold one because of, I was a student and really should be spending money on that kind of stuff, but I did anyway. I was still working. But still. And then got one a few years later, again, because I wanted it as part of my collection. And then, of course, you have the CD32, which was 68020 based and had an extra chip on it, actually, from the chipset that allowed chunking to planar conversions so that software could be ported from PC architecture to the Amiga architecture very quickly. The 1200 and other computers like the 4000 didn't have that chip, so there's an advantage of the CD32 for sure. Let's talk a little bit about the chipset in the Amiga, because this is really what really led, I think, the Amiga to stand out. Now, using coprocessors in computers wasn't a new thing. So Atari had its chipsets for the Atari 800 and the 400. The Commodore 64 had VIC and SID. Even the VIC-20 had, the first version of their video interface device as well, right? So the Amiga, though, was a little bit different. So you had a chip called Agnes or Fat Agnes, or depending on the version, Fatter Agnes or Alice, which was really an address generator chip, bitmap manipulator, and also had a coprocessor called the Copper in it, which helped with graphics. And it's really that chip, along with the next chip I'm going to talk about, Daphne, Denise, or Lisa, which really handled graphics. And if you ever get a chance to talk to RJ McCall about the Boing Ball demo, it's those chips that allow the graphics to do what it does, and the processor is really doing nothing in that particular demo. So the Boing Ball demo was a demo that Amiga Corporation did to demonstrate the Amiga at the Consumer Electronics Show. And it's this red and white ball that bounces in a room off the walls and the floor and the ceiling. And it also plays a sound of boom, boom, as it hits the wall. It is iconic. And also some others, like there's a juggler demo where a robot is juggling 3 spheres, and those spheres are reflecting the images that, well, we really can't see because they're mirrored balls that this robot's juggling. And just a beautiful demo, and all capable because of this chipset. So Fat Agnes also helped with display synchronizing so that we know exactly where the image is being rendered by a monitor, television, or whatever device. So it keeps track of that synchronization. And of course, direct memory access. Daphne, Denise, Lisa. Daphne was in the Amiga 1000, Denise in the 500, 2000, I think in the 3000 as well. And then Lisa in the AGA architecture, so the 1200, the 4000, and the CD32. And then you have Portia and Paula, which was sound and also drove devices and peripherals, so the floppy drives. There's a chip Gary, which was a gate array. And then in the CD32, you have a Kiko, which did that chunky to planar, but also was also a combination of, bring in Gary and some other chips. So it really sort of made the CD32 much cheaper to produce because you had fewer chips and all merged into a Kiko. There were other chips such as Ramsey and such in the 3000 that did different things as well. So again, all those special chips really brought together something really special in these computers. And if you look at how computers are built today, like this one here, coprocessors are really a thing. My GPU, in fact, VGA cards, and even CGA and EGA cards, right? But really the graphics cards of today with their GPUs, coprocessors. You've got dedicated soundboards, so your ad-lib sound cards, or you name it, from Creative and other companies that made sound cards, right? Again, they were coprocessors to, at least on the PC side of things, the Intel, AMD, and whoever else was out there in those days creating sort of Intel clone chips. Memory-wise, the 1000 came with 256. They nearly went 128, but really to do anything on the Amiga, you really need 512, so half a 512K, so half a meg. To really do something with an Amiga, you really need 1 meg of memory. So in the front door here, I've got a memory upgrade. Interesting thing about this 1000 is it requires Kickstart, which was the ROM essentially loaded off a floppy disk and then brought into some memory that's dedicated for that. And then it's kept in memory, so it's essentially read-only, and is saved through refreshes. On the 500 and other computers, they all had their Kickstart chips inside the computer. So, and they were upgradable. I actually had upgraded my Amiga 500 from the original 1.3 Kickstart to the 2.04 Kickstart when the version 2 of the Amiga operating system came out. But so the 500 that I have, I believe, is a 1.3 Kickstart, and then the 1200 that I have is a 3.1 Kickstart. The CD32s are both 3.0, although the Terrible Fire, I believe I could actually upgrade that Kickstart to any of the latest Kickstarts, etc. The CDTV is 1.3, although it also, of course, has its own ROM for the CDTV specific functionalities, such as the CD-ROM drive. The CDTV I have also has a 40 meg hard drive in it, so I have an AD-IDE hard drive on that, and I'm able to use that as a full-fledged Amiga 500 with a CD-ROM drive. Commodore really had something special with the Amiga, and I think some people knew it. I think certain people in management sort of knew it, but management by the end really did not know what they had in the Amiga, and it was a gem. They really didn't know how to market it. I think, did they do their best? I think they probably did their best. But again, mismanaged. Could it have been much bigger than it was? I don't know. The sort of myopic view in business of IBM, 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 you can never go wrong with buying Big Blue, really, it just was really myopic, because there was so much more that this computer could do. So let's talk about what I did with the Amiga. So I certainly did all my homework on it. So I was in high school when I bought my Amiga, and I used PageSetter for desktop publishing, and I used ProWrite for all of my homework assignments. It was what you see is what you get. You had a whole bunch of fonts. I could do some really cool looking documents that I handed in as assignments, and certainly even in university. I certainly played games on it. I mean, I've got two of my favorites up on both screens here. So Arkanoid, Hybris. Blood Money was hugely tough, but I adored the music, and it's one of the things that actually attracted me to the Amiga was sort of the music capabilities. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So yeah, played a lot of games. Let's talk about music. So the Amiga is really what I learned a fair bit about synthesis and manipulation of waveforms, and where I learned about sequencing. So way back in 1986, there was a particular school I was at that had an Amiga, and the music teacher I had, Mr. McGurk, had actually an amazing technology setup. So he had an Amiga computer, he had a Yamaha DX7, and actually one of the things I was supposed to do was actually figure out how to hook up the DX7 to the Amiga. And that's where I learned about Sonics, Aegis Sonics, which was it was the first, well, no, it wasn't the first soft synth I've actually used, but it had a sequencer built in. You could create sounds with it. It was pretty amazing. The actual, and I didn't really talk about this in the Commodore 64 video, because I'm going to do a whole video about polyatomic and my progression from the Commodore 64 all the way up to present day on how I learned subtractive synthesis, analog synthesis, sequencing, manipulation of waveforms, and bringing it all together, and to essentially lead me to my first releases in 2003 professionally. So I learned with Aegis Sonics a little bit more about sound manipulation and sequencing. And then it was later, around 1993 in university, where I really learned a fair bit about sequencing and using MED. So MED an Octamed for playing sounds and triggering sounds and such. And with that, creating a horrible set of tracks using sound samples and stuff. I might release it. I might put it up somewhere so that people can hear how awful it was. But yeah, yeah. But you got to start somewhere, right? When you're building art and you're learning, you've got to take the time, make mistakes, and do something really sort of out there until you really find your groove, etc. I'll be honest, meds and Octamed drive me nuts. I can't stand that sort of way of sequencing. If you're really into programming, then sure, have fun with it. But I work better horizontally rather than vertically, for sure. Anyway, I digress. So I learned a lot about sound from the Amiga. The Commodore 64 was significant for me in terms of learning sound, attack, decay, sustain, release, and some of those concepts. And I would actually use music programs to help me with learning the piano, learning the piano and the piano lessons, because I would sequence some of the tracks I was having problems, or pieces of music that I was having problems with, on my Commodore 64 and on my Amiga, to help me learn timing and things like that, and then convert it to the Commodore 64. And I would actually take tapes of what I was sequencing on my Commodore 64 and the Amiga to my piano teacher, and then I'd play the piece of music on the piano. Did it really work for me? It taught me sequencing, and I learned heaps about timing. I'm still not great with timing, and in terms of reading music from a staff, admittedly, I can't do it. I mean, I know where the notes are. If I take my time to really read it, I can, but I'm actually better by ear, and that's just me. So I digress. That's music. Graphics wise, you had programs like Deluxe Paint from Electronic Arts, which was a huge game changer, because people could not just paint an image. Paint for the Mac was just black and white and had some infills, etc. But programs like Deluxe Paint were amazing for its capabilities of gradient and you name it, the various tools that you can use to paint a picture back then. And then you also had its animation capabilities, which were also a game changer. So when it came time to do presentations in school, some people would do sort of a Bristol board type project, and they would talk to pictures and things like that were on the Bristol board, or use overhead projectors, which were static at those time. So it was a sort of a light table with a sort of see-through piece of plastic, which would then project an image up on the screen. I didn't do that. I brought in my Amiga 500. I hooked it up using the A520 converter, RGB to composite converter, and I'd borrow one of the televisions and present that way. And it's actually one of the reasons why my marks were high on certain subjects, because I loved doing those presentations. And forget PowerPoint. We didn't have PowerPoint back then. We had something called Amiga Vision. So Amiga Vision was an authoring system that was often used for, educational purposes, for, think online like Groyler's Encyclopedia. So you could click a button and it might play an animation, then provide details, etc. You used an authoring system to provide that sort of point and click details. Quite often, like if you went to, I don't know, some museum and they had a digital display there with a touchscreen, again, using something like an Amiga, whether it was CDTV, an actual 500, 2000, CD32s. CD32s were used for these. You could create a whole sort of point and click sort of flow using Amiga Vision. I used Amiga Vision for my presentations, and I would, in certain cases, dump it to VHS. So I would actually create a presentation that would, display images for a period of time and then switch images, and I'd use wipes and fades and things like that. Not too unlike what I'm doing with Final Cut Pro and iMovie for my YouTube channel, but definitely more rudimentary. But it was ahead of the time because you could literally put a block, display an image, and then if you wanted to add logic, you could add logic, and you could get to play audio. So display the image, play audio at the same time, color cycle, play an animation, that kind of stuff. And it was, again, ahead of the curve. People didn't get it in the business world. Maybe marketing people did, but again, marketing people were probably thinking more, hey, Macs and other computers. But the Amiga could do it all. That's why the marketing slogan was "Only Amiga makes it possible." It really did. Again, programming wasn't a huge thing that I did on the Amiga. I was doing a lot of that in school on the icons that we had in the computer. So again, the icon was essentially a computer made in Canada, based on the Unix operating system and based on specific standards that the Ontario government had at the time. So they were very ubiquitous from, I would say, 1986 onwards, and certainly until about 1992 in the school boards here in Ontario. So that's where I was really starting to learn more hardcore programming and things like that. But I happen to have this book on Amiga machine language that I think I'm going to pull out and take a look and see what I remember on Amiga machine language programming. One of the things actually that was really cool about the high school that I went to was my computer teacher. So a gentleman by the name of Bruce Mazer. Bruce was amazing. And he recently retired, in the past 3-4 years, I believe. So not only did he put up with us and a whole bunch of computer geeky kids that kind of knew what we were sort of doing, etc. And, some of the trouble that we got into, again, hats off to him. I will say I very much appreciated what he did for us as our teacher, etc., and the things we learned. But one of the things that he did was he actually somehow managed to build a relationship with Commodore and got them to send over, I don't know if he paid for it out of the budget he had, or whether he actually arranged with Commodore to provide them for free for a period of time and then he would return them back, a lab of Amiga 2000s. Now, Mr. Mazer was huge into what I think many would consider the AV club thing. We were the AV club in many respects, a group of us. So we would be the people that recorded school events on video, such as school plays. But we didn't just record the school plays and make them available and recorded for posterity purposes. We actually added titles. He actually had bought one Amiga 2000 with a Genlock. So a Genlock allows you to synchronize the display on the computer and a live video source, so you can do things like titling and other funny things. And it is what actually inspired me on sort of creating this channel, but also way back then on the presentations that I did that I sort of talked about. And so we would add titles to school videos and school play videos with, who played what role in the show and that kind of stuff. And it was really quite incredible and really, really special. And for him to have arranged a mind-blowing lab of Amiga 2000. I think there were like 5 or 6 of them. Maybe it was only 4 of them. I don't remember the actual number, but it was there, and we could actually use them and use them for different things, for learning Deluxe Paint, learning video effects. I know his dream was to have a video toaster. We talked about that a lot, and it would have been amazing if we could have afforded to get a video toaster in school. Like the things we would have all done with that machine, just mind-blowing. And the funny thing is, you can now do that today with, a Mac or a PC, depending on, which camp you're in, etc. So we can add titles, we can do 3D renderings, we can do Genlock-like things, we can green screen. Back then it was very much blue screen, but we can green screen today and do it all on our desktop computers. It's really mind-blowing what we can do today with our technology. And that's actually kind of the genesis of this channel, is, putting together my first PC in 20 years and just realizing just how far the technology has come. And, doing that comparison. But again, Mr. Mazer, Bruce Mazer, was amazing to have as a computer teacher. And I know a lot of where I am today is very much a result of him having been in my life as my computer science teacher. I was regularly using Amigas from about 1990 to maybe 89, but I think it was 1990 when I first got my Amiga 500, up to about 1998. So when I got my first PC, I was still sort of trying to do everything I could on the Amiga. In fact, in first year university, instead of doing my assembly assignments on a PC, by that point, actually no, it wasn't until second year that I actually had a PC. But in my first year, I was doing assembly assignments not on a PC, but I was doing it on my Amiga 500, emulating a PC and running an emulator to do my assembly assignments. So it was emulating an 86, probably a 186 or 8088. I don't know. It still ran DOS. I could run the assembler and I could do my homework assignment on it. And it wouldn't crash the whole computer. It would just crash thankfully, just the emulator when I crashed it. So, but I did all my assignments, other than the programming. If I had to do programming, I did have to go into university and use the Windows PCs. They were running Smalltalk or Linux PCs, or dial in. I could dial in and use the Linux computers on the sort of remotely and do my C, C++ assignments that way. So I didn't specifically need a PC, but I did realize that by the time second year came around that I really needed a PC laptop. But then when I went to the UK in my third year, I really didn't have a need for a PC. I could do Mac emulation on my 3000 and do my homework assignments that way. Or again, if I needed a PC, I could actually use the PCs in the computer. In fact, I actually used PA RISC machines, Hewlett-Packard machines as well in those days. So again, I could dial in if needed. Although actually in the UK, I had to use a lab because I didn't actually have network access in my dorm room or a phone line. Really wasn't a thing in the UK at that time. Hugely expensive as well. But to finish my degree, I actually finally had to buy a PC, and I did in January 1998. It was a Compact Presario 4528, and it got me through my degree and the paper I wrote on Delaunay triangulation algorithms. So yeah, and then from that point on, it was between PCs and Macs, and I really didn't use the Amiga 3000 that I had, so it was just sitting in my apartment for many years until I passed it off to Sid Bolton again, that I mentioned, who was running the Personal Computer Museum in Brantford, Ontario. So, but I always had an affinity, and I've sort of rebuilt my collection. I think the 500 I should probably get rid of and actually sell to someone. I have the 1200, so I don't necessarily need to keep the 500 around. I have, of course, the Pi Storm that's available that I do want to get going on it, and a few other things that I could actually sort of upgrade it with. I've got the Terrible Fire accelerator on the CD32, which makes that CD32 much faster than the Amiga 3000 I had. So there's no reason for me to have an Amiga 3000, and I can keep that CD32 around. In fact, I think that CD32 is, that particular one's not recapped, but the other one I have, I think is. But I should get those double checked. The CDTV, I will always adore the CDTV. Despite the CD32's being backwards compatible with the CDTV, there is just something about that hi-fi component style of the CDTV that's just classic. And given it was not a big seller, they are somewhat rare. I've got 2 keyboards for it, so those are extremely rare. I have the one joypad that's available. I think I might have a mouse somewhere. I'm pretty sure I do. But I'd love to get the trackpad if I could, so kind of get that as a complete system. So there is still software being made for these computers. There's, for the Commodore 64, people are still making games and programs and such for it and getting them to do cool things. And there are still people developing for the Amiga. So for example, this, which is Gerbostar, and I apologize if I massacre the name on this, apologies, but Gerbostar versus the Gersmeows. So yeah, it's a game where you're inside of a computer and you're shooting all these bad things that are trying to attack you inside the computer, like bad batteries that are leaking all over the motherboard, that kind of stuff. And it was fun to play. It works beautifully on Amiga 1200, given the power, etc. that computer has. It works on the 500. It slows down a little bit when there are lots of sprites on the screen. And it's available from Chiron Studios. So as I understand it, he doesn't have a website up yet, but he's local Canadian, and really wonderful to see someone writing games for the Amiga. And it comes with an actual floppy disk in it. He's tried to do the quality control, since double density disks are not being created these days. So so a wonderful way of recycling those old disks, etc. And it also comes with a manual. So the typical sort of old school packaging in a box, etc. So gotta love this. So yeah, people are still developing for these platforms, and I've seen an increase in people sort of building their own computers. So less so 68,000 based computers, which the Amigas are based on, but certainly 6502 based processors and Z80 based processors. People are doing cool things. People are also sort of giving new life to their computers by, using services like PCBWay and creating their own motherboards, and even fixing issues with those motherboards, like based on like the revision 5 Amiga, this version 6, etc. And putting in their old chips in these computers and creating something that is backwards compatible, but also next generation version of their Commodore 64s, their Amigas, etc. So it's really cool being able to see new life continuing on that way, and people wanting their old hardware to live again. So if there's a problem with the old motherboard, pop out all the chips, replace them onto a new motherboard, and away you go. So it's absolutely wonderful. And you learn heaps about computer hardware that way, computer software, and yeah, it's wonderful to see many do-it-yourselfers take that path. In terms of emulation versus the real hardware, I'm actually okay with emulation these days. I'm not one of these people that feels like a need to have actual hardware, but there is something to be said about being able to pull out a machine and sort of talk to it and then demonstrate it and really show those machines some love. Because there's still a lot that can be learned from the old architecture, the old hardware, and the old ways of doing things that inform us about how we got to where we are today. And that's the joy of retro computing, old hardware, and the point of some of these videos is where did we come from and how does it inform where we're at today. Thank you for listening to this series on the Amiga, and I'm not sure where I'm going to go to next. I think I should talk about my retro gaming console that I talked about, so look forward to that. I think that's going to be my next series of videos.